Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to begin. If you can take a seat, appreciate it. Erik and Carmel, thank you. Are we on a go, Rick? Hello, Montclair, and welcome to tonight's conversation on an elected board versus an appointed board. Tonight, I want to really say that I appreciate those who are here in the audience and those online who are watching. Next week, the township will really go to make a decision that will have an impact on not only our school district, but our community. And I want to thank the individuals who are up here on the dais who will be speaking to you. They are all incredible people who are here for a reason. I am not going to take all your time tonight. I just wanted to make sure that I said thank you. My name is David Cummings. I'm the 4th Ward Councilor in Montclair, and I use this opportunity to really hopefully inform you all with the impact of this decision. This is not about politics. This is truly about having a conversation that will be informative so that when you do go to the polls, you have as much information as possible to help you make that very, very important decision. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Craig Dunn, who will serve as the moderator and introduce everyone on the dais who will speak. So thank you again.
Thank you, Councilor Cummings. Good evening and welcome. There's been national studies that say that no one board, appointed or elected, has all the answers. But what it did say is that the system produces a stronger school board. No one model produces a stronger school board than the other. What it does talk about is based on the community itself, the strength of the community, the commitment to the students, the commitment to the school system, the commitment to the teachers, and its overall personality of the town. So whatever your situation is, position is whether or not we have people on the board, school board, who keep in mind the one true product of education in Montclair, and that is the children, the resource. The resource also the teachers. Will the school board have support? And then will they have a safe working environment? That is the key. So on our panel, I'm going to ask each one to introduce themselves, and then I'll start with an opening question, starting with Mr. Gill on the end.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Mr. Gill. You're still my favorite teacher. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Cummings for inviting us here today to discuss this very important issue that confronts our community and giving us an opportunity to share our ideas. I'd also like to say that, I think I need to say that as a teacher of 52 years here in this community, I'm very proud of what we have accomplished over that time. Knowing full well that we haven't done everything that we should have done, but then again, look at this building. This building was created by good work of the people of this town working together. So, welcome to Beneck School, as someone who's spent a major part of adult life here. It's so great. This is our first public meeting here in this building, so that's a sign of normalcy. And I also want to put in a plug for Beneck School. It is the oldest school here. It is the oldest school in our community, and we are celebrating this year our 125th anniversary. So, and we are doing a digital history. I'm going to do a plug here. We're doing a digital history of our school. So if you're out there and you have attended this school or taught at this school, please contact me because we'd love to interview you. Number two, I'd also like to say that I am here speaking as a citizen of this community for 48 years and not as a member of the MEA. I do not represent the MEA today. As a matter of fact, the MEA has not even taken a stand on this issue, so I wanted to make that very clear. So I guess that's all I'm going to say if I'm only talking about myself.
My name is Erik DAmato. I'm a parent and a resident here of almost 8 years. I'm from the state of New Jersey, unlike a lot of folks who get into town recently, and I have been leading this effort that's called Vote Montclair, which started about 1.5 years ago, not purely about the Board of Elections, the Board of Education, but on other things that have to do with voter participation. And this is just our biggest issue right now. I guess we're not going to get into the meat of it. The only other thing I can say is that my family has loved living here. It's been an amazing thing. We moved here not from New York, but from Europe. And it's been a fantastic place to turn my kids into Americans. And overall, we do love the schools. We wouldn't go anywhere else. And we can talk about all the, other things in a second.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? My name is Bob Benecke. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Councilor Cummings and the Township Council, Mayor, Manager, for working with me over the last several years, and of course Padmaja Rao, who's your CFO on the Township side, who does a wonderful job. I've been doing this now for about 45 years. I've written 5 textbooks for Rutgers. I won't bore you with the rest of my history. I did receive an award from Rutgers Blaustein School of Planning after I taught my 1,000th student, but that was over 2 decades ago. And I officially stopped teaching last September at the collegiate level. I wrote the state public accounting guidelines for municipalities and counties, including the first treatise on school board funding in 1986. So I'm just here to lay out some facts and outlines and answer any of your questions on some fact-based material and factual analysis. And it's not, in my mind, appointed versus an elected school board. In my mind, it's just to have you get some information as voters and as participants in this wonderful town. And I have a family member or two who live here, and it's a great place. I'm a big cheerleader, and it is a AAA municipality, that's for sure.
I like that AAA thing. Good evening, everyone. My name is Johanna Wright, sometimes known as Coach Wright, Mama Wright, but I try to stay in that right lane. So this evening, I'm really excited to be in Montclair because this is my home. I grew up here. I honed my skills here. My family's still here. And I'm here to talk about my experience as an elected board member. I have been elected 3 times in my district. And I'd like to say that these comments are my personal views, and I am no way speaking for or on behalf of my school board. But I do want to say that an elected board versus an appointed board, there really isn't very much difference. You're going to run into the same problems with an elected board that you have with an appointed board, with the exception of money. I have to say that what concerns me about an elected board, coming from an elected board, is that an elected board has the same problems, as I said, that other folks have. In my town, I am only the 3rd. We've only had 3 elected board members in 10 years that were independent. What we have is I don't know how I want to say it, but you have people who run on blocks and on slates that basically sit in control of what's going on in the district, and even at sometimes administer through the back door through the district to run it. And so I don't want to see Montclair experience any of that. It's sort of like a monopoly on who's getting elected on the board. So if you have the money, you have the email list, you have the wherewithal to understand what it's going to take to change things, and if everything is going as well as you think it should, then think about people who are elected. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a 45-year educator as well. I've taught in high school, I've taught in middle school, and I've coached several sports, including track and field, basketball, which I'm probably known for a little bit, just a little bit, the basketball. But my whole life has been dedicated and committed to children. And that's really why I accepted an invitation here. Because when you're looking at elected versus appointed and what's happening in Montclair, and not only in Montclair, let's look at what's happening around the country with boards of educations being basically taken over, and people having one-item agendas to do what it is they have to do. But at any rate, I'm here to answer some questions and be as honest as I can and tell you about my experience as an elected board member.
So you guys are going to have to share this mic with Craig because that far mic is not working. So that's just a little technical deal. You guys can share that so that Craig.
So, Mr. Gill, and then Mr. DAmato, you can follow this question. What impact do you believe the elected school board will have on the school system, the Montclair school system?
All right, so let me be a little bit of a teacher. As I always say to my students when we look at a social issue, let's look at the problem, and then let's try to figure out what are good solutions to that particular problem. What would be a rational way for us to address that? So let's just start with where I think what got us here. So number one, I think on the list is COVID. COVID got us here. There was no way to plan for it. Whether you had an elected board or an appointed board, there was no playbook. There was no ability for anyone to anticipate that. And when we did see COVID arrive, we started to realize that there were a lot of deficiencies in our school buildings, and most notably, as everybody knows, with the ventilation systems throughout the school district. There had been signs before that there were issues in our buildings and the under expenditure on our capital budget when the stairwell collapsed, and that was pre-COVID, at the high school. But unfortunately, nobody really saw that as a sign, an ominous sign to COVID. Then the second thing I think got us here is this revolving door of superintendents. That has really, I think, hurt this community tremendously. There's been no consistency of message. There's been no consistency of our ability to attack what the problems are here. There's been almost a sense of putting out fires as we go along. And that has really gotten us to the position where we are, where we're starting to doubt whether or not an elected board would be better than, or doubt whether the appointed board works and whether an elected board would be better. The third thing that I think that happened is obviously the opportunity gap. Everyone in this community is concerned about that. There is not one person that feels comfortable talking about that. And unfortunately, we've been talking about that over a long period of time. Inroads have been made, obviously, in certain areas, but we have a long way to go. And I think that's also concerned people, and that's how we got here as well, because of people's anxiety over that issue. And then finally, I think the thing that also got us here is what I call the yearly spring right of, okay, we don't have enough money. It's unfortunate that each year it seems that we find out that the next year's budget has been impacted by a lack of funds, and this year was really troubling when so many teachers had to be laid off, many of whom were asked to come back, true, but the point being that it led to a lot of instability within the school district. So that's how I think we got to this place. And I think, personally, that looking at an elected board is not the solution to that problem. I think that it sounds good, it's reasonable, but I don't think that it's going to solve the 4 problems that I have pointed out, and I'm sure as we go along, we'll talk about that.
Same question.
To me?
Yes, same question.
Can you restate the question?
Yes, I will. What impact do you believe the elected school board will have on the school system?
Well, I think it'll just lead to more transparency, more accountability, more responsiveness. That's a key thing. I mean, right now, the school system here is extraordinarily non-transparent. Parents spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on, sort of asking basic questions of each other, scurrying around. I've had an investigative reporter of national renown tell me that he sent his kids to private school because basically his family couldn't figure out what was going on. Now think about that. If an investigative reporter can't tell you what's happening, then it's not really transparent. It's not really accountable. We don't know who runs the schools. Everybody's always like, who's in charge? And we see it right now with the scuffles between the board, the Board of School Estimate and the Board of Education, kicking the can back and forth and each pretending like they're not in charge. And then on responsiveness, we have a new generation of sort of political behavior that's been inculcated, especially through the use of, smartphones, where people expect to be in touch with the people who govern them and not to have this kind of hermetically sealed College of Cardinals, which is what we have, where they're literally appointed, like at the Vatican, the white smoke, who is this person? We just want to have a more normal situation that is going to be accountable and well, am I going to tell you, it's going to magically lead to buildings being fixed? No, but it will provide oversight, independent oversight and independent control of a system as it is done almost everywhere else in America, where we don't actually see a lot of these problems, to be perfectly blunt. So, I think it's, you can't draw a straight line to physical things being changed, but you can say that it will, it will fix a lot of the management and cultural problems around the school over time, I think. Thank you.
Mr. Benecke, you have experience with both types of districts. Can you give us some background on the impact of each?
Thanks. It's a great question. And I'd just like to start out with a couple of premises. First off, there's about 601 school districts in the state of New Jersey. That includes all forms of districts. There's about 550 some odd districts, including regional school districts, that would be considered K through 12, not necessarily teaching K through 12, but having a K through 12 environment. There's also jointures, vocational schools, etc. There's 15 Type 1 school districts. Those 15 Type 1 school districts, and this is as of last count, there may be a little bit less now, so pardon me if 1 or 2 have slipped away. 15 out of the 560 are Type 1 school districts. The 2 most famous are Montclair and Summit, both very highly regarded school districts. There are 2 state-controlled or state-supervised districts, only 2, one in Camden County and one in another county up north here, Passaic. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the parameters we're dealing with. Of the 550 some odd school districts, approximately 9 of those districts that are self-contained, I call them municipal-oriented districts, like Summit or like Montclair, only 9 are AAA rated. Of the 565 municipalities in New Jersey, less than 5%, about 4% are AAA rated, including Montclair. Montclair is the most diverse, and it is clearly the largest and most active AAA municipality in the state, and I would argue one of the most outside of California, most diverse and most active and dynamic municipalities that's AAA rated in the country. Of the 550, give or take, school districts in New Jersey, Montclair is known as an excellent school district, and it's ranked number 51. By niche, a little bit less ranked by U.S. News and World Report. U.S. News and World Report and other ranking systems attribute the ranking to the quality of teachers. That's the A number one. As a matter of fact, we score in the top 4 or 5% of the quality of teaching staff in the entire state of New Jersey. So that gives you a little bit of idea there as to the quality of the school districts you're working with. In addition to a couple of the nuances, Ms. Wright here is in South Orange Maplewood. They actually have a Board of School Estimate, believe it or not. They have 3 members of the Board of School Estimate from Maplewood, 3 from South Orange. All 3 are elected Board of Education members. And they have 3 members of the Board of Education and then 3 members from Maplewood and 3 members from South Orange council members. So they have a Board of School Estimate that's actually appointed, and they decide on the budget and also on the capital program. It's quite an interesting, I call it a hybrid school district, but it's a type 2 school district with a Board of School Estimate. It's the only one in the state. In addition, just as a little factoid, there are 565 towns. Only 1 town does not have a mayor. That town happens to be South Orange. Has a Board of Trustees president. So, moving on a little bit. In addition to being ranked number 51, and believe me, that's quite a feat when you see the Bergen County and some of the Morris County school districts that you're competing with, and not to mention some of the others like Livingston, et cetera. We're higher ranked than Pequannock, West Orange, yes, Verona's cohort, Park Ridge, and yes, some other towns and other school districts like Wayne, and like, well, I could just go down a list, Sparta, Paramus, Rutherford, Kinnelon even. And you go to Kinnelon, they think they have the best school district in the state. They don't. You have a much better school district here, actually, folks. So the working between the type 1 and type 2 school district to focus on the teachers, Mr. Gill will tell you that, and it's a focus on the students and the action and activity of the parents and the community at large. And Montclair is second to none in that. Absolutely second to none. In terms of working with the boards, most type 1 school districts are very responsive. Most type 1 school districts have that responsiveness because the mayor controls the Board of Education appointive powers and appointments, and the mayor really is responsible, therefore, for carrying out the wishes of the school district, of the teachers, of the parents, et cetera. So you vote for a mayor who then appoints the Board of Education, similar to New York City, largest school district in the country, very similar. If you plumb or look back at the history of school districts in New Jersey and municipalities, there were only about 5 or 6 city school districts in the mid to late 1800s. New Brunswick had one, Trenton, Plainfield was one of the first, and a couple of other cities in this neck of the woods. And that was the nature of city services back then, where school districts were provided through the cities. And they were very large schools. Some had 70, 100 children. Go look through all the history and really go through it. It's quite interesting. But there's a cliff because you don't know where the services began and ended. And it sort of ended when townships grew up. Now, we're a unique township, right? Because we're basically an urban center here, nice, great downtown, a lot of diversity. But maybe 100 years ago, it was much like, say, a Randolph, which is a township, or Mahwah, which is a township, et cetera. And those districts grew up as a type 2 school district, whereas a lot of the more urbanized areas grew up as type 1 school districts, and over the years that got peeled away. So, and it got peeled away for a lot of different reasons, including the fact that most townships in the suburban areas and then the rural areas were type 2 school districts automatically. So that gives you a little bit of a context. Final context for a tax rate, the tax rate equalized, in other words, effective that you have in Montclair is about $2.80. In other words, 2.8% of value. Approximately 1.6 out of the 2.8 is from the school district. About 0.7 out of the 2.8 or 25% is from the town, and about 0.5 or a little bit less than 25%, obviously about 20% or slightly less is from the county. And the balance, about 55 to 60%, is from the school district. When you open your bills at home, and those of you out in Zoom land and TV land, when you open your tax bills in August or September of any year, and this is throughout the state, there's been studies done all throughout the state, you don't blame the school, you don't blame the county. There's only one person you blame, that's the mayor. Maybe the council too, and maybe the city or township manager. You get my point. That's who you're blaming. And that's one of the reasons why type 1 school districts actually were developed about 100 years ago. So I've said enough, and I'll move on.
I feel like I got a little master's degree on that one. Thank you. Listen, the elected board has the same problems that folks are complaining about in Montclair. Plus, an elected board structure adds a lot more problems. We talked about the Board of School Estimate. We have a Board of School Estimate that operates like no other in the state. We have a district that operates like no other in the state. When I retired from teaching in 2012, I did it specifically because of the elected board that we had. I knew I had a strong chance to get elected because I was sort of known in the community as an advocate for children. And so I broke that mold and I broke into the election and I won. And then it became a system that was filled with cliques, with people with special interests, people who had a lot of money. And with money comes control, right? So you have to ask yourself, with an elected board, what audience have you eliminated? In terms of an appointed board, you know that there is an audience, but once you cross that threshold, it's very hard to get back, as you can sort of understand that everybody wants an election. That's what everybody thinks in the back of their head until it actually happens. And school boards are very, very difficult now to deal with. I know when you have a board that is dysfunctional, such as our board in South Orange and Maplewood, it's no secret. All you have to do is Google them.
Likewise. We have.
When you have a board that's fractured, it's difficult. When you have a rogue board, this is what we're talking about with an elected board, and of course, I'm looking at a purview in terms of citizens, the responsibilities that we have to our taxpayers, the responsibilities that we have, number one, to our students. And so it's really, really important that people understand who would be eliminated if in Montclair we decided to turn the clock back. Look at your magnet schools, look at all of those things that could change. A lot of people did a lot of work to make sure that Montclair is the district that it is now. We're still struggling in South Orange and Maplewood with integration. We're still struggling with, the gentleman, Mr. Gill, called it an opportunity, having kids having an opportunity. The opportunity in terms of the achievement gap, it's an expectations gap. And so, thank you. And that's what it is. And so an elected board is not going to change too much for you. As a matter of fact, it will set you back 50 years.
Thank you. I know, Mr. DAmato, you mentioned something about lack of transparency. And so how would the elected board guarantee transparency?
How would it what?
How would an elected board guarantee transparency?
Well, it would just be 9 people, several of which would be independent. I mean, if you look at the way boards function, Coach Wright talks about a rogue board and all of this stuff fractious going on. These are elected people. I mean, it's just like the council. It's a normal democratic body. And you can say, oh, people want elections like it's a little toy. My children were born in a country that only just started having free elections. I mean, this is the big thing. This is why I'm into it. This is a voting right. This is a very basic voting right that citizens in every town that surround us have. My neighbor moved here from Patterson, and he said, we were talking today over the back fence, he goes, think about it, I moved here from Patterson and I lost my right to vote. I lost my right to vote. Montclair is a special place. I love being here. I love my family is here. I love it. But one of the things objectively that makes us special is the lack of voting rights. That is a fact. That's an objective fact. We have fewer voting rights than our neighbors. So it's not a small thing. And when people are elected, they are accountable. You run for an office, man, you go to the supermarket, people talk to you. You know, you're accountable to the town. So this is not some theoretical thing, it's a real thing. Now, how it's going to play out, if it happens, is, you know, it'll be a mix of things. And people are saying, oh, it's going to be perfect, or there's going to be a horror show. It's not. We look at South Orange, Maplewood. This is our sister cities. And I agree with Coach Wright. Like, we will see a lot of these issues, but we will at least be able to vote. We will have some degree of agency and autonomy as citizens. And it's okay. Maybe the system worked, you know, before, as important people have been saying. You know, maybe it worked before, but it's time to graduate and have a normal local democracy like everybody else does. And I think we can do that. I'm going to go on for a little bit because it is 3-1 up here, and that's okay. But I am going to take a little time. So our pitch, and you will get these things, hopefully.
Excuse me, sir. What do you mean by 3-1?
What?
You said 3-1. What do you mean 3-1?
Is it 4-1? I can't even tell. No, I'm just saying. Anyway, don't worry about it.
I do worry about it.
This is our pitch, is that can Montclair improve its schools while expanding voting rights? These are two things. For some people, it's really important, A, the schools, improving the schools, and I think that there will be some measurable differences. And for other people, it's just really about the voting rights. That's what we've heard. I want to vote. I want the same rights as everybody else. Now, if I could very quickly talk about some of these financial issues. I have looked into this. We talked about the AAA rating that the town has. That is an achievement. I agree. I've talked to every major credit rating agency, and they have all told me that the rating would hold. It would be completely identical and fungible. If anything, the district would be higher rated. All of the performance metrics that you see across the United States point to this maintaining its rating. And now very quickly, I'm going to do some show and tell on financial management. Do I think it's the worst in Montclair? No. Is it terrific? No. And I'm going to show you something. I looked through the financials and the auditor reports of our two sister towns. A very key one, F1, is what we spend on maintenance and construction. For South Orange and Maplewood, there are two beautiful pages of different itemized construction projects that have been going on that are bonded and listed in great detail. You know what's in the Montclair one? Nothing. Absolutely zero. And more importantly, at the end of the report of each auditor's, now this is a schematic, so it's the same for both towns, so the same questions. There are a series of 10 test questions that are crucial about like things that the auditors are recommending. Montclair's, well, we can start with South Orange's because it's easier. 10 questions. Are there any recommendations? No, 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 no. They're doing just fine. Ours, 5 out of 10 have been failed. So I'm not going to say that that's a 50 and a fail because, you know, you can weigh each one. But this is an objective sign from our auditors that everything is not working correctly. And I'm not going to get mad about it. I'm not going to say that the auditor, you know, that everything is dirty. But I'm not going to also agree with the idea that somehow the fiscal management of our town is on par with most elected boards because they have more oversight. Things work a little bit better. So I'll end there right now. But you know, please note it.
So that was a financial. Would you like to say anything in response to that, Mr. Benecke? No? You're good? Okay. So, Mr. Gill, what would you like to add to this conversation at this point based on what you've heard thus far?
I'm sorry, I did not hear you.
What would you like to add to this conversation based on what you heard thus far?
Thank you. Now I heard you. It's what happens you get old. Well, the first thing I think we should do is think about what elections do well, and then what elections what problems elections can cause problems, where they can cause problems. So people run for office, they need money, obviously. So where does that money come from? That is a huge concern. It was a huge concern in our municipal election this last year, where the union that I belong to funded the mayor to run for office. And that created a great outcry in our community about that's unfair, blah, 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 and so on and so forth, which causes divisiveness. And it also creates the idea that this mayor or anybody who's elected like that would then do things and be beholden to those who give him money. Well, if that's the case, if that's what people think, then what would change when we got to an elected board? How would that change? In some of the research that I've done, I've noticed that one of the greatest funders of elected boards are insurance companies. They seem to think that this is a great way for them to obviously get business. There's always a quid quo for people who run for office. You give me money, I'm going to get elected, and then I will help you with particular contracts when there comes time for us to award contracts. So these are some of the concerns that I have about that financial pressure that can come to bear on the decision-making in an elected board. You don't have that with an appointed board. Somebody gets appointed, there's no financial consideration. I'm sure the people who sit on the board would then look at the choices of, let's say, insurance and not think, okay, how do I get reelected next time? How am I going to raise money for my next foray to be elected on the board? And therefore, my decision-making can be clouded that way. So that's one of my major concerns about an elected board, about the invasiveness of money, and we see this throughout politics today. And I think that in a community that we live in, we have such great and wonderful people who serve on this board and do so willingly, although some people, I guess, they had their arms twisted because it's a very difficult position to be in. But I think that I think we're better served by people like that than people who are elected through some moneyed interests.
I would say it's 100% in the opposite direction. Having 9 board members that are each individually elected absolutely brings down the value of money in the process. Mayor Spiller was elected with over $300,000 of dark money that piled into the town. It was a total quid pro quo, commercially funded election. I have talked to so many people who are willing to run as small money candidates or no money candidates. This campaign that we have run will come in at less than 1/4 of what Mayor Spiller spent for his almost uncontested second run for the council in 2016. We will spend $5,000, and I think we could have spent much less than that. Ideas can travel. It's 2021. You don't need to be spending money on giant billboards and all this kind of stuff. If you have an idea, if you have a reputation, you can win. This will not be big money elections. This will be people walking the streets, talking to their neighbors, talking to their friends, telling people what their ideas are, what their background is. There's not going to be any craziness, or if there is, it'll be good craziness, If there are people who run in an election that you don't agree with or that are fringe, that is not a reason for canceling democratic elections. This is the argument that is made in Russia, in Kazakhstan, in Venezuela. It's not an American argument. You have an election. People give their opinions. People say what they're going to do. You believe them or not. You don't cancel them. The appointed system is an authoritarian system That is just about the absence of democracy. Democracy has some problems, but we live with it. This town could use a little more of it.
Well, let me just say this. When you know you have a lot of power and you use that power in different ways, right? You can use it in different ways. You can help inform people how to navigate complexities of a district, or you can do what we've done as an elected board, which is help run. We have people who help run board candidates, give them the knowledge in a nice little packet, and only the way the people who are sponsoring you see it. You get people elected, and then you continue exerting power without having to be on the board. When someone has the wherewithal, the money, as I said before, the emails, the email list, the knowledge, and the people to run, and you know it's just a game of catering to the uninformed. There it is. That's it in a nutshell. The other thing is, what is better for our children, right? What is better for our children? Where are we going? Where are you going, Montclair? Summit has a great Board of Education. It's appointed. And they are excellent. And we can tweak what doesn't work here with an advisory board. I learned about the advisory board. It's perfect sense to me. That's a way where you can keep the balance, and you need a balance. And when you're talking about people not spending much money for a board election, the first year that I ran in 2013 in South Orange and Maplewood, the slate that ran against me had huge billboards, huge, in each train station with their candidates. I did not have that kind of money. I was recently retired school teacher. So my pennies I was counting, but I counted on the people to help. And the people that helped were my former students and community members who were parents, who knew who I was. And that's how I was fortunate enough to get in. And while I have been told I may not have the votes, I say I have a voice. And it's very hard when you're just that one voice and the votes are continuing to go down that road. And in terms of transparency, I learned more about what's going on the board in Facebook posts personally, and this is true. I'm not fibbing here. That's where I get most of my information. I get resolutions that come through. We get resolutions that come through within 24 or 48 hours that no one's had an opportunity to read because we don't have the power. We don't have it, but you do. And listen, this happens at all levels of American government. You think about it. I mean, how many people do you appoint in town now? In the planning board, I haven't lived in Montclair in some time, and my family still lives here. So Montclair is Montclair. It's a very special place, and I want to see it stay that way.
With an elected board, how do we ensure diversity? Because if it's, to your point, if it's voting blocks or campaigns or slates, how do you ensure diversity to actually support all students in the school district and not just a certain group of students? Mr. Gill or Mr. DAmato, you want to start off?
Well, there's some evidence in the state where certain groups within a particular community have been very good at getting the vote out and getting elected people who support the positions of a specific group to the detriment of the rest of the community. I think that's something that's very troubling. Now, people will say, well, people in Montclair are very engaged, and we wouldn't have that kind of a problem here, but I think that that is really something that we have to be concerned about. We have gotten here, and this has been very difficult to get to this place. As someone who's been here for 52 years, the controversy has been part of Montclair. It's DNA. And I think that's what makes us a vibrant community, because we've had people with varying viewpoints and so on. But I think that if you looked at back in 1977, when this whole issue of desegregation in the magnet schools came about, we had in this community an organization which was called BEAM, B-E-A-M, and they were called Better Education for All of Montclair. And I could say satisfactorily to you that had we had an elected board, they were very well organized, and they would have gotten elected a board that would have never brought about the magnet school system we have and the renovation of this very school. They were very much against that kind of an expenditure, and they felt that that Montclair did not need to desegregate. This was the wrong path to go. So that very much concerns me. In a vibrant community where we have diversity, that in fact we could have an election that creates a board that does not reflect who we are, and therefore voices will not be heard.
So I think this was one of the strongest seeming arguments against moving to local democracy in this area. The idea that diversity representation on the board would be negatively impacted. And I felt that way at the beginning, at the onset. I was like, this could be the problem. But the more I looked into it, the more that argument just vaporized. Now, one example of this, well, I'll just preface this by saying that some people may have seen a video that has gone around that made the charge that if we move to an elected board, that the board would be entirely composed of white males. And this happened right before the debate that Coach Wright was on, and we were all looking at South Orange and Maplewood as our comparison town. And I went and looked at the board, as we did, and discovered, in fact, there wasn't a single white male on the board. The board was beautifully diverse. It was more diverse than our board, literally by the numbers, 44% black versus 42% black. And it had, more than that, it had an amazing diversity of experience and professional background. People from the private sector, coming from places that you wouldn't imagine. I mean, it was a board that I looked at and I went, I'll take it. I love it. And you know what? It had 3 educators on it too. It was a great mix of people, all bringing different viewpoints. They looked great and they had diversity of opinion. Overall, I would just say, again, the thing, 50 years ago, I think you're absolutely right. There's a time and a place for something. And you know what? We should look at what happened in the intervening years and say, we won. We won. That viewpoint won. There is nobody in Montclair that wants to go back to 1977. There was an amazing piece that was in the Montclair Local by the head of the Montclair Republicans, and he said, we like busing. We like integration. You can't find somebody in Montclair, forget about winning an election on taking apart the magnet system. You can't find somebody who doesn't like it. We all like it. We just want it to work better. The other thing is that the idea that somehow these folks in Upper Montclair, don't want to vote for diverse candidates, that's just backwards. They love to. People love to. Maybe they won't do more. They don't want to see their, property taxes doubled, that's for sure. There's a limit to people's progressiveness and generosity. That is true. But in terms of voting for people, diverse candidates, that is something people love to do. So this is not going to be our problem. There will be other issues that we'll have to deal with. Diversity will not be one of them.
Well, there may be a financial impact on the shift from type 1 to type 2. Mr. Benecke, would there be? Would you explain?
So just a couple of background points. One of the reasons why type 1 school districts have diminished over the last 2 or 3 decades, as I said previously, is that many of the urban districts that were taken over by the state in the Abbott versus Burke days, including Patterson, by the way, were state supervision. And to come out of state supervision, you could not go back to type 1 school districts. You had to stay at type 2. So if Patterson never came out of state supervision, they'd still have the SS next to their type of school, as 2 cities in New Jersey still do, and they would not be a type 2 school district. And by the way, they still have certain state monitoring in their school district. With respect to the bond rating, it's doubtful that they would have, the new entity would have a AAA bond rating because of 2 reasons. One, as I said before, you have 29 municipalities in New Jersey out of 565 that are rated AAA, and about 8 or 9 self-contained school districts. So there's no direct link. If there was, you'd have the 29 AAA municipalities with 29 school districts, and voila, you'd have the crossover. There is no crossover. The reason that there's no crossover is one of the metrics is that you have to have an adequate fund balance. And adequate fund balance means free cash flow and liquidity. In school districts in New Jersey, you're limited by liquidity. The liquidity is limited to 3% of your total operating budget. There is no such restrictions on municipalities, and there's 2 reasons for that. Don't mean to get into the weeds, but it's pretty important for everyone to understand. The first reason is that school districts are guaranteed their money. They're guaranteed your property taxes, the $170 million or the $120 million that is turned over to a school district, whether it's here, Patterson, South Orange, Maplewood, no matter where it is in the state of New Jersey, you get that money. You only have about 12 accounts receivables then, January through December or July through June. That's it. The 11,000 or 12,000 taxpayers of Montclair pay the town, pay the city, pay the village, and those taxes don't come in fluidly. They come in clumps, lumps, ups and downs. That ups and downs is called delinquent taxes. And there's a reserve for uncollected taxes in every municipal budget that guarantee the schools their taxes and their tax levy and their cash. And that's in the Montclair budget. It's on sheet 29 of the Montclair budget, and you'll see it. It's for the county also, don't get me wrong, but it's also for the schools. So think about it. The schools are guaranteed 100%. They're guaranteed 100%, but we only collect on the township side 95, 96, 97%. So we're down 3%. That 3% is of $200 million, so automatically $2, $3, $4 million has to be placed into the municipal budget. So there's a leveraging of the balance sheet that the cities and municipalities can do that school districts can't. So to solve that problem, what the state did about 40 years ago is they developed what's called the State School Reserve Bond Act. It's a bond fund, and it used to be rated AA. So no matter where you went in New Jersey, every school district had at least a AA bond rating. Well, guess what? The state's rating went down. It's now BBB and BBB+. So you can't count on that School Reserve Bond Act anymore. So a lot of the rating agencies used to count on this AA bond rating because the State School Bond Reserve Act would automatically kick in. Type 1, Type 2, state supervision didn't matter. That's not the case anymore because you have this sovereign, the state of New Jersey, that has a lower bond rating than the township of Montclair, as an example. So what ends up happening is that automatically, let's just talk about the hypothetical 21 districts that don't have the same AAA rating that their cohort municipality does. They're automatically paying about 30 basis points, 1/3% more on their outstanding bonds. We have about $60 million of school debt in Montclair. Over the last several years, including 2013, which was a big year, and about 2008, there was a lot of funding of capital projects. I don't have the list as to what they were for. I'm sure someone at the Board of Education does. But $60 million is still outstanding in debt. It's very difficult to get a bond referendum in a Type 2 school district adopted for that kind of money. Now, it is done, and it can be done, and it's a lot of work to do, But the bottom line is that if you want to do that repetitively, a type 1 school district allows you through the Board of School Estimate process to do that. And again, we have the AAA bond rating. Again, in a type 1 school district, it's the entity's rating, in other words, the municipality's rating, that counts. And that's an important point to make. So all of those things sort of add up. And remember that you're still voting for the mayor. And 2 members of the School Board of Estimate are also voted for. In other words, they're elected. And that's not to say that they're, and I really don't get into the pros or cons of type 1 versus type 2. I'm just sort of explaining the mechanics and some of the technicalities of it, where you will save some money there. A long-range facilities plan is required by every school district in the state of New Jersey. A long-range facilities plan was last adopted in Montclair in 2008 until this past summer. I'm not so sure that even this past summer it was properly adopted. That's the precursor to whether it's a bond referendum or a Board of School Estimate action through the Board of Education, respectfully and respectively. So that long-range facilities plan wasn't done for approximately 10 to 15 years, last done in 2008, and that's the precursor. So any back and forth between this one or this group or that group as to facilities begins with the long-range facilities plan, which was and is 13 years old.
It is almost November of 2021, and none of the work on ventilation and remediation that was supposed to be done during COVID has been done. And that is because of the dysfunctional relationship between the Board of Education and the BOSC. It is a totally dysfunctional system. I will also say that education is an investment. It is our greatest investment that we make. People invest in what they believe in and what they trust. I've talked to so many people who have said, of course I would vote for, nobody has told me that they're going to vote against something, but they are so much more likely to vote for a capital project if they believe that the people who are doing it are being watched, are being accountable, are responsive, and are being transparent about it. We create a more transparent and responsive governance structure around the schools, and there's not going to be any question that we will invest better. Everybody wants to see it invested. One of my children was injured in the Hillside locker wall collapse. You don't think I want to see it invested in? I just want to know that it is being done correctly, and that's the way other people feel. The other thing I'll say is the notion that one of America's most progressive communities is going to live and die based on one notch in Fitch or Moody's rating score it's ludicrous. It's also a AAA credit as far as the market concerned. Money is free right now. Inflation is higher than the borrowing costs. So this is a total canard. It's a non-issue. Make it clean, make it transparent and responsive, and we do not have any issues.
At this time, we'll take questions from the audience. And there's a mic stand here. So you just come up, please.
Hi, my name is Noah Gill. I just wanted to ask, so let's say there is an elected board. What age do you have to be to run? Because I am proud to say that if people choose an elected board, decide on an elected board instead of an appointed board, I officially declare my candidacy to run for the Board of Education to be the youngest member on it, board member. So I want to know if there's an age limit.
Is that a question?
Well, I'm 21, so that works out. Thank you.
Hi. I have a point to make to Mr. Gill. I think that you're not correct in saying that insurance money could back candidates running for election, because regulated companies like insurance, banking, casinos, PSE&G, they cannot give to political campaigns. So I just wanted to get that out there. The second thing I wanted to ask, and I had sent this question before, so let me just find it. Okay, so I had been doing research for the Board of Ed referendum question, and I became very concerned when I'm doing this research about the achievement gap. In my view, this is the most important education deficiency that needs to be addressed. I don't know how to do that, for starters, have no idea. But my question for Mr. Benecke is this. It seems that the school budget, there's about $6.9 million, almost $7 million, that's called student transportation. I was wondering what money would be available to spend on initiatives to reduce or eliminate the achievement gap if Montclair reduced, I know it's a sacred cow, if reduced our busing or reconfigured our busing or did something within our magnet school system configuration that we could have funds to spend on the achievement gap rather than transporting kids back and forth. Have there been any things that are done in other communities where teachers move around rather than students? So that's my question really. So if we went back to a type of neighborhood schools, a hybrid neighborhood schools, reduced busing, we had this money, $6.9 million or some portion of it, to spend on trying to eliminate the achievement gap, which I think is much more important than socializing kids. But that's just my view. That's my question.
So the first standard of bus transportation in New Jersey is done by age and by geographical distance from your house or student's house to a school. The gravitational pull away from neighborhood schools started maybe 25, 30 years ago. And there are some municipalities and some school districts that still operate on K-6 with neighborhood schools or K-5. But here you have a embedded contractual service and an expectation for student transportation, and that will probably remain. Again, the achievement gap, and we could talk about that. Obviously, Mr. Gill is very well versed in the achievement gap issues, and I don't want to step on that. But the most important issue that we have is that you have a school district that right now is in about the top 10% of all school districts in the state. Maybe a little bit higher if you start to parse things out. And again, I mentioned some of the cohorts that are lesser ranked, and I'm not a big believer in comparisons. Rankings may be a different thing.
But no due respect, you're not answering my question. There must be some monies available. We are the only magnet school system that has from pre-K or whatever, K through 12, that has a magnet school system. Other schools, I think South Orange, they maybe go from 7 to 12 or 6 to 12. I forget what the schools are, but we're the only one that does it from babies up to seniors.
That's not true.
I think it is true.
Sparta has, I know Sparta has magnet schools. There's a larger geographical area. But to answer your question, I don't see transportation being reduced in terms of cost to increase other instructional areas.
Okay, but at some point I'd like to know what that $6.9 million is spent on. Thank you.
I know people are concerned about diversity and integration. We had a parent group in South Orange and Maplewood that sued the school district because we did not enforce the Office of Civil Rights settlement. And that was with a very diverse Board of Education. But when we look at diversity, we have to look at other kinds of things on the board. The best boards are ones with a diverse skill set, not just diversity of people. You need finance people, construction, education, personnel, all of these things. So you can get that with an appointed board, not the randomness of who will run.
Thank you. So
I just like to address some of that. So in terms of background, I came here in '76. I had taught at Hillside and it was part of the DSEG plan. And I remember people saying to me at Hillside, oh, you're going down there, going to Glenfield. There was a whole idea that there was something wrong with Glenfield for whatever reason. I got here, my new books were Mount Hebron's old books. That is a fact. That was not going to improve, no one was going to improve education for minority groups in this community unless we got people into this school from other neighborhoods who then recognized that this school was underdeveloped, great school, great teachers. You know, the gym flooded every day. The gym was also the cafeteria. There were no wings on the auditorium. We had a very small gymnasium. If any of you went to school at that time, you remember that. And there was, the thought was, well, hey, separate but unequal doesn't exist here. Well, it did. And we need to maintain the integration of this school district. That is like vital. This is why people come to this community. They believe in what we're doing. And we don't need people to start to look at the line items and start to say, oh, look, busing. We could educate poor kids better if they were all in the same school or whatever that is, because that doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
There's only one person doing it, though. It's Carmel. I mean, nobody in town is talking about this. This is not a thing. We are in complete agreement. Busing or assignment by zone, as it is known, is sacrosanct. And Councilman Jacobellis has a great thing that he did, which was that he created a pledge that I will not vote for any candidates, be for the council, mayor, or for a school board in the future that does not support equity on that line throughout the town. I will take that pledge. And frankly, I think, this is one of the reasons we know that this is what people in this town believe. This is why people come here. And this is why I think the NAACP Education Committee gave us this gift of their confidence to endorse moving to an elected board, because they have the faith that people treasure this effort, uniformly in this town. And to talk about gutting transportation for, frankly, which is not a very big amount of money, it's 5% of the overall budget, is just not, it's like saying we're not going to feed the kids or heat the buildings. It's the core of who we are as a community, and it's not going to change. And if it ever did, you could track me down and kick me in the rump, because I'm one of the biggest supporters. And again, my only apologies is for not mentioning and honoring the Ed Committee of the NAACP for taking what was a relatively difficult decision in supporting an elected board. And I think we have to be inspired by that courage and look to them. I'm old-fashioned in that regard. If the NAACP says something, I follow it.
So I'm fairly new to Montclair when you look at the history of the town. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes. After you guys have talked, I think I am more thoroughly confused about which way I want to go. I guess I have a two-part question. One, could someone explain to me what is in the purview of an elected board? Because some of the things you talked about, I don't know if they have influence over. So I would like clarity on what do they have influence over. And two, with regards to an elected board, I will tell you, as someone who volunteers consistently with my son's school from Nishawane, and now he's here, there is a clique in Montclair. And there is a tendency for like people to cluster together to push agendas. And so now I'm sort of concerned about this sort of elected board, because there is a very strong minority voice. I feel, in this town. And that strong minority voice tends to have a point of view about things. And I know you think that things can't go back, but we already heard at the beginning of the year, why does such and such school have tents and we don't? Why are such and such schools eating outside and we're not? So I feel like you may be having very high hopes that equity and people are concerned about equity, but at the moment that it impacts your child, I feel like people sort of revert to natural tendencies. So, two-part question, if you can help me understand what does the board actually have a purview over, and two, I guess I don't really have another question about the elected part of it. Just wanted to state that statement.
Was that to me?
Actually, Johanna, you're probably the worst equipped since you are on an elected board. Can you pass her the mic?
I'll take it when you're done. I'm supposed to start, so I'll just say real quick that the elected board has, and again, it's complicated in New Jersey, has two tracks. One is an April election and one is a November election. There's actually a Senate bill that's come out of committee that is attempting to get the November elected Board of Education to also have the voters once again vote on the baseline budget. That happened prior to 2012. In 2012, that changed, where the elected Board of Educations went only from April to either April or November. If a Board of Education at that time chose to have a November election, then they did not have a voter approval of the budget any longer. However, if you stayed, and there's a handful of towns that stayed in an April election Board of Education basis, they now still have that right, if you will, to vote on the budget. The November Board of Education elections do not have the right. However, there is a Senate bill coming out of committee that wants to restore that right. I don't think it's going to get passed for a lot of different reasons, only on the baseline budget. Board of Educations are required to comply with the Robinson versus Cahill decisions, the thorough and efficient education decisions, and the state budget cap law. Basically, as in the municipalities and counties, restricts your increase to 2%, and there's a lot of different adjustments, for example, for increased enrollment and some other things. So they do vote on the budget, and they do vote on contracts, and they do vote on personnel decisions at the Board of Education. So there is a two-track system for a Board of Education. One is April, voting in April, and you would vote for your Board of Education in April and vote on the budget. If the budget is declined or voted down by the voters, it then goes to the governing body of the municipality. It's a little cumbersome process. If you vote in November, then the voters don't get to vote on that budget. And then, of course, you have the bond referendum, which is held in sporadic times during the year. That's a whole nother train of approvals. And it's a sporadic, but there's general election times as well. And that the Board of Education then would have and post a bond referendum where the voters would decide whether or not they want to spend their money on a capital plan or not. In addition, there's state aid that's associated with the debt service, and that state aid is placed into the bond referendum as well. So those are some of the nuances of a Board of Education. Again, they do vote on contracts, superintendents, and the like.
And to really get to the crux of your question is, it's a real concern that people in power can dominate the issues with the district. And it's just a small percentage of people that can drive things, like in the South Orange Maplewood School District. So that's a real concern. And I think that's the crux of it. Did I answer your question?
Thank you.
Right. The other thing you have to look at is voter apathy and people being informed. And education is too important today.
Thank you. My name is Norma Tassi, and I'm a lifelong resident of Montclair. I'm an 80s era Montclair High graduate, and I educated my son in this town too. As a involved parent, as our neighbor there talked about, I do feel the same concerns that she feels with regard to the cliquishness. I have a couple comments, and a question. My comment, I'm sorry? I will do. My comment is that I'm taking this vote super seriously, and it's disappointing that this building isn't filled with, this auditorium isn't filled with people with the same concerns, because it's important. My real question, my real concern as I weigh the issues is that I want to know who is in charge of implementation if this vote is taken on the yes line. What's the implementation schedule? How are we grassrooting our candidates? What's to come next if the vote is yes?
Those are excellent questions, the practicalities. So if it's a yes vote, the board would be expanded by 2 seats, so from 7 to 9, and that would happen in a special election. From what I understand, Mr. Benecke can maybe help me, that state law holds that specials are in January, March, and apparently it's a little tough for Essex County to get it together, because they run our elections and pay for them. For it to be in January. So it would be in March. And now, how is it that people learn how to run for elections? They just do it. It's a natural thing. One of the most uplifting, times of this campaign for me was to talk to an amazing gentleman named Tyrone Tarver, who was the board president in Orange. It's like people don't know it. It's, 20 steps that way. And they converted in 2017. And they just did it. And it worked. You didn't hear about it here. There was a problem because the powers that be there, the council, fought it as hard as they could in court. But it worked, and they've had a bunch of elections, and they just are normal elections. People figure it out. It's okay. And then that body just becomes the full body of 9 people that runs the schools, including the budgeting. And what's great about the normal system, and again, it's just the normal system that everybody does in New Jersey, except for just 11 places now, is it's staggered. 3 seats are elected every year for a 3-year term. It's wonderful. It's like physics. So you just have, and it's the top 3 vote getters out of, whoever votes. And they serve for 3 years, and so there's an institutional memory because they don't turn over the whole board. It's not like our council, which sometimes gets completely turned over. There's always people who have been there for at least 2 years that are sitting on the thing. And again, it works. You don't hear about it. It works in Glen Ridge. I have a friend who sits on the board. I've met people from Clifton and Patterson, and it's just one of those normal standard features of American democracy that just clicks along. And if and if it happens that's what happens here, I'm quite confident that people will just figure it out like everywhere else. And if we have difficulties, it'd be great. We can ask people like Coach Wright, who can come and help us, hold our hands, and Tyrone to come and help us and show us how it's supposed to work. And maybe we'll take a cycle or 2.
So, Norma, to your question, I asked Town Attorney Ira Karasik what would be the next steps. And the next step would be an election in either January or March for the 2 seats. But those 2 seats would only be for 1 year. And then the question is, what would happen to the 3 current board members who are up in May? Those individuals have a choice of whether or not they want to remain on the board until November, when the next election will come up, or if they come off the board, then we'll have to have another election for their 3 seats. So essentially, the 2 who would be put on the first time would only have 1 year so that they can match up with Miss, I think it's Allison Silverstein, who has 2 years left. So then that way, that then starts your staggered board setup. So then you would have the 2 who run now would go for 1 year. The 3 members who are coming off, 3 people will replace them. However, if one of those or two of those members do not elect to stay on, you then have to find people who would run for, no, the board would actually have the right to appoint people to replace them. If the board cannot come to a consensus on the 3 replacements or any replacement, it goes to the county superintendent, who then will appoint 3 members or whatever members are left. So it gets very convoluted depending on what, or potentially can be very convoluted, depends on what happened, because you will ultimately have to get to the 3 staggered system, where the other part is every year you will be voting on an election for board members, which is another question that has to be answered in terms of the community should be aware of that. So I just wanted to clarify to make sure your question was answered, Norma, in terms of what happens next if you do have an elected board. You have a question, sir? Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
I've spent my life in advertising, and I bring that up only to quote Don Draper. Don Draper in Mad Men said something absolutely brilliant. He said, if you don't like what people are saying, change the conversation. And what I've heard for the last 5 days, this is directed at the folks who are for an appointed board. What I've heard is fear. What I've heard is it's going to be 1976 and we're going to go back to racial segregation. I've heard that we're going to, busing is going to go away. I've heard all kinds of, terrible things. Dark money is going to come into the town. But what I haven't heard is why an appointed board would be any different. Because what I've seen since I've lived here for 11 years is a catastrophic failure of the appointed board to do even the most basic job. No maintenance. I mean, one stairwell collapsed. That entire board should have been dismissed. 2 stairwells collapsing, the collapse at Hillside, no maintenance being done. I need to know what is going to be different, or are we just going to go back to the status quo and just have an opaque board with invisible board members doing God only knows what? What's going to change? We clearly want change, but the folks supporting an appointed board don't seem to want to address the fact that people want change.
Well, I can say this, that first of all, people need to understand the responsibility of a board. They are not to run the district. They evaluate the superintendent who they hire, and you've had a number of superintendents, as have we in South Orange with an elected board. I think we've had 6 superintendents in the last 10 years. But governance is the most important thing, and policy. That's what a board of education, the board members, are responsible for. It is incumbent upon the superintendent to run the district. And so if you've hired the wrong people who haven't done the job, that's what they do, and that's probably why you've had a turnover in superintendents. But I did want to address Mr. DAmato. He said something not long ago, and I know before I left home, I had asked a question if the NAACP had weighed in on the elected or appointed board, and you told me that they had weighed in, and I'm not sure if that's true. Does anyone here know that for a fact?
Mm-hmm. When it came to the major body, that's where it came to a standstill, and I'm not going to even say why it was like that, but I will say that it's representative of the town. You have people who are for, and you have people who want to stay with appointed, but I don't think at any time it was controversial or anything like that. It was just to a point where it was just so even, and I think it represents the town. But the education committee
Okay.
Good evening. I've longtime resident. I participated in a forum the other night, but something that you said, Erik, just got me out of my seat. It's easy when I'm listening to you talk about things. You've got a very comforting voice, and it all sounds like it's going to be easy and kind of painless. But one of the things that really strikes me in the process of elections is not, no effort to suppress voters, but concerned about potentially suppressing candidates. And I think one of the things that's so important when we're considering who our board is making sure we have the best candidates. The League of Women Voters, of which I'm a member, has a lot of resource materials on their website. And one of the things that the League did is they surveyed past board members and past mayors to get their viewpoints on this issue, pro, con, what problems were, what benefits might be. And one of the things that was interesting in the survey was that 14 out of the 19 respondents on a question of would you have run or would you run for a school board, 14 of the 19 said either no or probably not, and only 2 said that they would. When I listened to some of the other members on the forum the other night who were for elected boards, they both spoke very highly of the board members who were colleagues or people that they've worked with before. And Peter Jacobellis, in a letter to the Montclair Local, called out the current board and said he had really had a great deal of respect for all of them, that he admired the candidates who had been nominated by the mayor, and if they were up for election, he'd probably vote for them. So it doesn't seem like we have a problem with the caliber of the members of the Board of Education. And yet we recognize that if we go to elected, a lot of those good people probably wouldn't be available to us to vote. So a major component of elections isn't just the right to vote, it's the right to choice. And one of the biggest concerns I have, and we all can sit here and say Montclair is genuinely unique, and we are in so many ways, but our voting habits are very, very similar to those of our neighbors. West Orange has 2 candidates for 2 positions. That's not a choice. You don't have to go to the polls. And you referenced countries before, where your kids were born and that don't have those rights or just recently got those rights. Democracy isn't about voting, it's about choice. And Caldwell has 2 candidates for 2 positions. West Caldwell, 2 candidates for 2 positions. Verona has 3 candidates for 2 positions, but one of the candidates who was interviewed less than 4 weeks prior to the election was asked which of the 6 strategies that Verona has for their school board, which go through 2023, should be emphasized, maybe didn't need to be followed up or could be dispatched entirely. He said, in an effort to be transparent, there's your transparency, he said, I don't know what the 6 strategies are. Now, if that's not good enough for you, for a candidate for the school board, you don't have a choice. I know in the early years, if we go to elected, we're going to have plenty of people running. It's not a fun job. A lot of things won't change. We know that. Where's your confidence that we're going to have the caliber of choice that we currently have to sit on our school board and educate our kids?
Well, first of all, I'll say if not having a choice in several elections means that there shouldn't be elections or that some kind of electoral jurisdiction should be voided out, you can say that for the 4th ward that we're sitting in, which has not had a competitive council election in what, Councilman? 3 terms?
Yeah, 2000. Yeah.
3. There have been
2008.
Since my children have been alive, I think there's not been a choice on a ballot there. In 2016, 7 out of the 8 council elections were unopposed. So why don't we just get rid of elections in Montclair? Look, you want to ask me where my confidence that we'll have a good slate of candidates? Well, actually, I'll back up and say that survey that you did, which was interesting, and I think you participated in it, you're asking people after they were on the Montclair Board of Education whether they would do it again and run for it. Well, okay, they've been through it, but that doesn't talk about people willing to do it in the future, right? So there are going to be more people willing to do it. I get my confidence partly from this building. I was on the PTA here, and just in the PTA that we had in Glenfield, we were overflowing with talented, dedicated people who got into the weeds. I mean, we're going to be spoiled. The pain will be having to select through all these amazing candidates. We'll be spoiled for choice, and I think it's going to be tremendous. I mean, I'm optimistic. I'm a pessimist about a lot of things. I think we have a lot of challenges coming down the pike with things like, finance, and I'm worried about what happens with New York City and whether commuting comes back and what happens to the fundamentals, the economic fundamentals of a high-priced commuter town. We have challenges. This is not going to be one of them. I have great confidence that we will have great people, and I think that, judging by this forum tonight, we'll have good conversations. I don't think we'll have a lot of wackadoodle stuff. I think it's going to be a great surprise. I may be totally wrong, and again, you can then come to my house and yell at me. You're welcome to. But I have tremendous optimism and faith. Partly, again, the NAACP has helped give me faith that we will deal with issues having to do with equity. The more I've gotten out there, the more optimistic I've gotten that we can make this work as a town. And I'll close by saying that the democratic deficit, as it's called in political science speak, that we have in this town of uncontested elections, outside money, all these problems that we have with our democratic forms, some of those will be ameliorated. Having school board elections that are local and face-to-face and normal will give a little kick in the behind to our normal democratic institutions here. And I think in a few years, this town will be a lot healthier. Its civic life can be rejuvenated, this can really help other problems as well. And I'm not a Pollyanna. I'm a person. I look at the dark side of stuff a lot of the time, and I'm hopeful about this.
So mindful of time and the weather, if anyone has another question, here's the time. But I do want to make two clarifications, or 2 points. One, you talk about voters and being elected and being a part of the process and democracy, which I think no one wants not to happen. In April, Clifton passed a $168 million referendum for their schools. Sounds great. Of the 54,000 registered voters, 4,500 voted for that referendum. So less than 8% of the registered voters determined what 100% of the taxpayers paid.
And that's exactly the turnout that we had in 2016. That's exactly the turnout.
Hold on, please. I did not interrupt you. Second, Diane England is the chair of the Education Committee of the NAACP. They did vote to support the election of the Board of Elections, the elected board. I had 3 phone calls today. One question, which we were not going to address, Reverend Dunn did not want to address, was that because there is a concern that there is a very small number of members of the NAACP who comprise the Education Committee and the general body. I'm just trying to clarify something, Diane, because I understand. Yes, exactly. And that's where we tried to go. But Mr. DAmato has made it very clear that he's proud of you guys' endorsement of that. No, so this is what I'm going to say. The NAACP, yes, I was an appointed board member because, okay, so I'll get into this. I was an appointed board member. I was appointed by Robert Jackson because at the time he said he wanted to bring on someone who was a part of the school system, had kids on every level of the school system, and understood the magnet school system. The flip side of that is he also wanted somebody who had a financial background, and he appointed David Deutsch. David Deutsch and I are completely opposites in how we look at education. So you get the opportunity, or what we got out of that opportunity was diverse of thought, background, and opinion. We did not agree on everything, but we were able to work together. So that's how I got appointed. The point that I was making, which Roger Terry, president of NAACP, called me to say, was that, David, if this comes up, I want you to make it clear that we have 300 members in the NAACP. The membership did not, all 300 members are not on the education committee and did not vote for the elected board. However, the elected board was supported by the education committee. So that's what he said. We wanted to eliminate that tonight. Reverend Dunn and I had that conversation multiple times today to say, let's stay away from that. However, Mr. DAmato has brought that up several times. And I think we just want to make sure that we have what I consider context to everything involved here. And I bring up the Clifton Board of Education and their vote as an idea, because right now, Mr. DAmato and everyone else, our district needs a lot of money. They have requested a lot of money. But in that funding, we are still looking for the plan. And I believe, Mr. Benecke, you can back me up, in order for us to pass anything, it has to go through a process where we see what is the plan. We know they want $15 million for the HVAC system. They've given us that plan. I was on the Board of School Estimates, started in September. We got this plan the day before our September 30th meeting. So that's not on the Board of School Estimate. That's the Board of Ed getting us the information. On that plan, there was a request for $15 million for 2022, a request for $37 million for 2023, and a request for $95 million from 2044 to 2030. Nothing in that plan told us what they wanted for $37 million or for the $95 million other than school improvements. So what we have to do is identify how do we as a township get that $15 million to the district so that the HVAC system can be put in place. Fortunately, we are able to do that by bonding it out and getting interest rates very low because of the township's quality rating. However, if we do go to an elected board, that $15 million goes to referendum. And it's very simple like that. Do I believe Montclair would pass $15 million for HVAC systems? Yes, I do. But then we have to consider the $37 million and the $95 million coming down the pipe. We often talk about where's that money going to come from? Who is going to be impacted? We have seniors in this town who are on fixed income. And I remember in August, the board said we should have they requested $60 million to fix the schools. Councilman Jacobellis said the council should pass that. If we pass that on to you all, that $60 million would equate to around $400 a year on your tax bill. Am I right, Mr. Benecke? So look at the fixed income seniors in this town. Do you think they can afford $400 million extra? Renters, the renters in town, they would have the opportunity to where are the landlords and property owners going to pay? Where are they going to get their money? We're going to have to raise rents. So the fact of the matter is, this is a very wildly uncontested situation where we don't know. But what we do know is that the decision will be made next week. And from there, we will all ultimately have to come together to figure out how do we move forward. And so I think, Mr. Dunn, with time, you had a way that you wanted to close out?
Yeah, God bless you all. I was going to have everybody have final comments, but I think everything's been said. Do you agree? Amen. Good luck, good night, and all the best to you.
That was good. Yeah, it was great. It was great. And I think you're going to win.
I don't think so. I don't know.
I think people
It's
are
loss aversion. It's loss aversion.
Well, it depends. You know, it's good that you have the governor's race because you're going to have more people vote.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry for cutting you off there, but that
No,
was
I think
Thank you.
it's